Hey guys, I just wanted to briefly introduce this podcast and say that unfortunately, on Evan's side, we had a bit of a sound quality issue in that his computer just gets a bit kind of tired, and you know, when you're on a diet, you get a bit grumpy and you start like groaning. So there's a bit of noise from his fan in the background. Hopefully, I've done my best to try and kind of get rid of this background noise. Some fantastic content coming along, so really appreciate you listening in. And we did our best with this. So cheers, guys, and enjoy the episode. Hey guys, welcome to the Macros Bodybuilding and Powerlifting podcast. I'm excited to introduce a really cool guest who is a natural pro bodybuilder and also an online coach like myself, Evan Godbee, who is joining us all the way from Australia. So really appreciate him taking the time, especially because the time difference, I'm glad we could make this work. And I just want to give you a bit of background about Evan, so you know a bit about him. And where he came from. So he has a background in karate, which he did at a very competitive level, and started weight training at 17. And that's kind of where bodybuilding, kind of from what I've seen, took over for Evan. And in 2009, competed and actually got his pro card in the WNBF, in 2011. So he's a pro natural bodybuilder, and last competed in 2014. Over the world, placing in the top 5 across all his 3 competitions. So that's really kind of like, I mean, without me messing things up, Evan's a very good bodybuilder, a natural pro bodybuilder, and has just recently had a very kind of prolonged off season. Well, for natural bodybuilders, I don't think it's necessarily very long. Some people might view it as a long time, but he's taken some time off competing to work on his physique. And improve, and is just about to enter a competition prep again. So is there anything you wanted to add to that, Evan? Thank you again for taking the
time. No, I think you covered that pretty well. Yeah, and thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. So I think I just wanted to initially go into some of kind of Evan's background in terms of where his knowledge and his kind of training experiences come from, in that you had kind of some mentors and coaches in, first of all, Layne Norton and Alberto Nunez, and you recently wrote for Alan Aragon in his research review, which many of the listeners will probably be subscribed to or at least know of, and you talked about the differences between their approaches. Do you just want to kind of touch on how much they really kind of influenced you and what kind of big take-homes maybe you took away from each person? Because they're actually quite, although both natural bodybuilders and both kind of evidence-based, they're quite different, at least personalities.
Yeah, they definitely are. So I was introduced to Layne in, I first heard about him in around 2010, 2011, and it was just actually a friend at the gym who had been following him, and I'd recently, in 2010, I'd competed at the Worlds for the first time, and I'd come away just missing out on a placing there. And so I really wanted to go ahead and do the Worlds again next year and try to get my pro card and so on. And I was thinking about, who can I get to guide me through this process? Because I've just been doing it myself and kind of just, doing well at the local level. But as you go up, it becomes a little bit harder. So I just wanted to get somebody to help me, to really push my conditioning to the limits and stuff like that, which is kind of where I'd been lacking a little bit previously. And so, without having done a huge amount of research, he just came highly recommended. I'd learned that he had, done his PhD, or he was doing his PhD at the time. And, he'd competed as a pro bodybuilder. He'd done really well. That was where I wanted to be myself. So I thought, okay, I'll contact him. And I actually contacted him about 6 months before starting the prep. And, he agreed to take me on. That was kind of how I got working with Layne. We only did a 3-month prep for Worlds. That was the only show that I did that year in 2011, and it just worked out really well. We did a pretty standard approach in terms of it was actually the first time that I'd ever counted macros. I hadn't really heard a whole lot about them or anything like that prior to that year. So I kind of got the plan from him, and I was like, how do I do this? I'm not used to doing it. He said, you better you better start figuring it out.
Mm-hmm.
So in that case, what I did was I actually wrote myself a meal plan to fit those macronutrient requirements that he'd set for me, and just kind of followed that. I more or less ate similar things throughout the diet. I think I gave myself a few different options there for meals. On Fridays, I used to have fish and chips or something like that on Friday nights. But I pretty much just, stuck consistently to it. I was losing weight consistently as well. So we didn't actually have to make a whole lot of changes. It was a fairly simple prep. I think there was like once that we dropped 10 grams of carbs from where we had started from. Of course, peak week being separate to that, where ratios change and all that type of thing.
Yeah.
But so I mean, it was a pretty simple prep, and that kind of really got me started into learning a little bit more about evidence-based fitness and nutrition and stuff like that. After that, I kind of came away, started listening to a few more podcasts myself, reading a few things, started changing my training a little bit, and basically had an off season. Had a good off season, which I hadn't really had, except for prior to when I started competing, because I was competing 2009, 2010, both seasons. Then I went to compete in 2011. So pretty much took a good 3 years off between shows, and decided to had planned to come back in 2014 and do my first pro season, which I did, and decided to, I'd heard a lot of good things about 3DMJ,
mm-hmm.
and so I kind of, because as you do when you're doing a prep, you kind of sometimes shop around for coaches. You kind of like looking at what type of content they're putting out, what type of approaches they take for themselves and their clients, and what type of results they're getting, and then you kind of just want to get a feel for each person, with, speaking to them and see who you gel with personality-wise. And I found that I really, like Alberto Nunez was somebody that stood out to me as an intelligent person, who gets great results himself. He gets absolutely fantastic conditioning, and he always does well, good job with his clients. And so that kind of made me think, okay, plus I'd been looking at a few of his YouTube videos, and I really just liked his approach and the way he explained things and so on. So I decided to work with him for that season, and initially I was just thinking of a 6-month prep. I'd actually been to Layne's VIP camp in, his bodybuilding powerlifting VIP camp in 2013. All the pros like Brian Whitaker were there talking about, 6-month contest preps, and that it was basically the standard for getting pro level conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
And I had not done more than 3 months at that point, and so I was thinking, okay, well, I have to do at least 6 months. And that's going to get me in, hopefully, in really good shape. And so, in fact, I contacted him, Alberto, further out than 6 months, and he said, look, I think it's a really good idea you actually start now. So we nearly did 8 months of contest prep. Cool. For that season in total, about 33 weeks it was. And what that allowed us to do was have a bit of, bit more leeway, lose, a little bit slower, have some breaks in there as well. And I was really happy with the whole prep. Alberto did my training as well, which when I worked with Layne, he'd just done my nutrition, and I had kind of handled my own training. So I handed, for the first time, my training program over to somebody else and let them control that. Started, having training blocks or mesocycles that I actually followed, and had a few different approaches there with RPE, which I was fairly used to, and then we actually worked on some percentage-based stuff a little bit later on in the prep. And I think that was really good too. So I've nothing but good things to say about both of those guys. Very different preps. Even the cardio was very different. With Layne, a lot more HIIT cardio, a lot more training. Was a combination of low intensity and HIIT cardio. Whereas with Alberto, we did a lot more low intensity cardio. And I was really happy with the results in both cases. but I tend to stick a little bit closer to the type of approach that I learned with Alberto. In fact, we're about to start, a new prep in next week.
Cool. Oh,
Yeah.
so you going ahead with Alberto again?
Yeah.
Very cool.
So I've just been. In fact, we worked together in the off season after my show for a good while, until the middle of last year, which is just because I went on holidays over to Europe. So prior to that, we actually worked together throughout the off season, bringing up weak points and that type of thing. So I think that he has a really good knowledge of how I work and what my body responds to and stuff, that type of thing. We tried a few different approaches with certain things. So that's mainly the reason why I'm going with him again, because he just knows me so well. And I think that's a really valuable starting point rather than going with somebody new. There's other great coaches out there for sure. But somebody that kind of already knows me pretty well, I think is, the best place for me to start.
Yeah, I think you brought up some brilliant points, which is if anyone is looking for a coach, they can do something very similar to yourself, because especially now we've got the internet, there are so many kind of well-educated coaches. You can look around, make sure they do know their stuff, look at their social media content, look at what they're putting out. And then also, importantly, you pick people who you resonated with and who you got on with. So, and then develop that relationship even further, which I think for a competitive bodybuilder to get the best results, to really, have a coach who really knows you, is so powerful to have that kind of objective view over your training and nutrition.
Yeah, definitely. So, really, I think that's a really important factor as well.
Cool. Just to give some context, actually, what's because you're a tall guy, what's your competition kind of stage weight?
Yeah, good question. So I know that from my all my data that I've tracked previously, the lowest weight that I've gotten to is 88 kilos. I'm not sure what that is in pounds for any American listeners that are tuning in, but about 88 kilos depleted. So that's when we're kind of digging hard.
Yeah.
I'm at my lowest calories and so on. Now on stage, I'm not entirely sure, because usually when you weigh in, I was wanting to be in the heavyweight division at the show, so I weighed in with clothes on. A lot of the time I have, I wanted to be in the heavyweight division, which I would have been anyway, like regardless. Yeah, anyway, I think I must have weighed in about 210 with clothes on, including shoes, something like that. So after filling out, it's going to be somewhere between that, I think. 210 pounds, not 210 kilos.
That's a big, like your lowest to your highest. I guess for people who are bigger, it's kind of a percentage increase in terms of kind of filling out with glycogen and water and all those things. But yeah, 194 pounds to like 210. Kind of that was what 88 kilos is. 194. I just did it on my calculator secretly, because I remember for my shot. I mean, I'm much kind of more like less muscular and shorter than you, and my lowest weigh-in in 2014 was 159 pounds, and then stage weight was 165 pounds. So only a 6 pound difference, whereas you had kind of like over 10 pounds difference.
Yeah, I mean, consider with clothes on, so maybe I would have been 200 to 205 without clothes. So maybe around the 10 pound difference. But yeah, you definitely feel out a lot from that peak week, especially when you've been so depleted. You're doing a lot of cardio. You're hardly eating any carbs, any calories, so on. So
cool. Well, I just want to move away from kind of your competitive season and just talk about a bit of your off season that you've just gone through, and in regards to kind of 2014 to now starting to compete. So it's a long period of time off. So you've had a long time to kind of develop weak points and things like that. How have you kind of, if you were to give an overview of your training, how's that kind of looked for yourself over the past number of years? Has it changed much over those years, or and compared to the past?
Right, yeah. So, I mean, before I worked with Layne, if we go back to, say, 2009, I was still basically doing a bro split.
Cool.
Your 5 day a week. Arms on Monday, chest on Tuesday, so on, all that type of thing, which did work well, to be honest. But I found that then, I'd heard about, increasing training frequency. So somewhere around 2010, I started implementing that for my legs, and they grew a lot because they were a bit of a weak point, and I found that in my first couple of shows. And actually, they kind of came up quite well in just 6 months of increasing the training frequency for them. But yeah, beyond that, I would have actually started taking that kind of approach for my whole body from 2012 to 2014 when I started working with Alberto, and I was using the RPE scale to manage my proximity to failure and so on, rather than using percentages of 1RM or anything at that point. And I think that really worked pretty well. It was just an even approach, so everything twice a week.
Mm-hmm.
So either a push-pull legs or opposing muscle groups in the same day. So for example, chest, back, shoulders, arms, legs, and then repeat that over another 3 days, and then have a day off. I think that for a bodybuilder and for me is a good sound starting point, because you've got that the twice a week per muscle group, and you're hitting everything really evenly. Now, when you're on the pro stage, you've got, and I suppose even on the amateur stage as well, you've got weak points really become an issue. So I would say that my biggest weak points are my back, probably my hamstrings, to a lesser degree maybe my calves. So I wanted to prioritize those muscle groups a little bit more in the most recent off season. So I've definitely been putting a little bit more frequency into those. I've been training my back pretty consistently 3 times a week. At the moment, I've been training my hamstrings just twice a week, but previously I've been training them even 4 or 5 days a week.
Wow.
Not high volume every day, but high frequency at least. And so I've been, some of these muscle groups, anybody will tell you with, certain muscle groups that they have weak points. Some of them, almost no matter what you do, it's hard to make them grow. So I've just been doing my best, and when we get the body fat low, hopefully we'll see that I've made some improvements there. I hope so anyway.
Yeah, definitely. How in terms of... Sorry, carry on.
Oh, no. I just think that it's also interesting because I was a period of time in this off-season where I've worked with Alberto, and then there's been a period of time where I've basically just done my own thing. And those 2 things are fairly different. In the approach with Alberto, we would run, he would tell me what mesocycles he'd want me to run. Occasionally we'd run a strength cycle, a lot more volume. And with that approach in mind, that I've spoken about just then, with prioritizing the weak points. Also, something that he's big on, bringing the volume down for strong body parts so that there's more recovery available for some of the weak parts. So we've tried that as well. And then I suppose, when I've just been working by myself, it's been a little bit less in the way of changing mesocycles and so on. I've been running a lot of the same kind of stuff. So just basically blasting my back 3 times a week, and just pretty much keeping that same kind of everything else twice a week approach. With of course deloads and stuff thrown in. But haven't been doing a whole lot of different mesocycles. I did change the exercise selection up a little bit. But, pretty much just straight through for a good 6 to 8 months of the same type of training.
Cool. So in terms of kind of for your own training, did you have, what was like your intensity, kind of what was your rep range that you were focusing on? Were you on that kind of traditional rep range of hypertrophy, or did you go into the strength zones?
Yeah, I'm not too, I don't handle strength work too well. I have a few injuries, and as well as that, I just tend to approve additional injuries every time I do a strength block, particularly if I do it for too long. So I can handle about usually like a month of a higher intensity, higher load training cycle. And if I start doing too much of it, I've run probably 10 weeks in a row before of strength work, which I felt was too long, and I got a few injuries, and it just seems to be every time I run a strength block, I do kind of get something like that. So I don't do a whole bunch of strength work anymore. I do a little bit more, just 7 rep plus, so a lot of 7 to 15, and where appropriate, 15 to 20. I do some 15 to 20 leg presses, leg extensions, rear delts, all that type of thing, side delts as well, in terms of lateral raises and stuff like that. But yeah, that's kind of the rep ranges. I really like, for a lot of my upper body work, around 8 to 10. So I kind of stick with that a lot. I think that kind of feels pretty good for me.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I'll throw in usually, because I'm training back 3 days, for example, I will do a day where I deliberately do higher reps, 12 to 15, and lower the weight, try to focus a little bit more on just getting a really good contraction, that sort of thing.
No, yeah, that's really interesting. And I guess, do you take a similar approach with your clients as well? Have you found this kind of not necessarily having too much periodization, kind of overall mesocycle to mesocycle, but more within kind of just a hypertrophy style approach? Is that how you approach it with your clients as well, for the most part?
No, not necessarily. I think that I do like to run specific training blocks of 6 to 8 weeks with them, and I would probably include some strength work for them, because I know that not everybody's like me. I know that some people enjoy strength work. I know some people just handle it a little bit better. So I definitely throw a little bit in either to each mesocycle, or we'll do like more of a strength focused block. So probably around 20% of their work is usually strength focused for a typical bodybuilder, and a lot more of their work is then within hypertrophy rep ranges. Occasionally we do a high rep, high volume block, that type of thing. But yeah, definitely kind of mesocycle focused for them. But yeah, just for me, it was kind of like I'd done training programs that had been set for me for a while, and I just kind of wanted to go back to having fun in the gym, doing what I wanted to do. I also have some training partners that I train with at night, and so that meant that not having a specific structure, I could do what I wanted with them. Kind of would say, okay, well, we're training back and chest today. We knew that, but sometimes we would change the exercises depending on what their limitations were and that type of thing. So just being kind of like having a semi-structured approach, but being able to have a little bit of flexibility in there and just enjoy the last 6 to 8 months of training a little bit more.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. And I think an important thing for people to take away is that you haven't started out where you might have, but you got most of your results from having kind of a structured approach, and then this non-structured approach comes after having all that structure. I guess that's why you can not get away with it, but that's why it kind of makes sense in a way.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
then
definitely.
you also touched on deloads. How do you structure your deloads, kind of in terms of how many, like every 4th, 5th week, or is it every 6th week? And then how do you structure the deload in itself? Is it just a volume reduction, or do you reduce some intensity as well?
Yeah. So when I started working with Alberto, he had me more or less do a deload usually every 4th week.
Okay.
And that's because as somebody who's fairly advanced in terms of training age, basically keeping me in, I realized that it's kind of like a quarter of the year you're deloading, so you're not necessarily making as many gains. But as an advanced bodybuilder, you're probably not making a huge rate of gains anyway. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So at this point, it's kind of like keeping me healthy, keeping me showing up, especially because I have some injuries already. I want to be able to have a little bit more of a longer time. Even if I stop competing, I want to be able to still train. I don't want to end up with, arthritis all over my body and that type of thing. So that was kind of the his approach. I tried to, with my own thing, just test out the water a little bit more, leave it every 6 weeks for deloading. I found that in terms of my whole like systemic recovery and how I felt, I can certainly handle that. I feel pretty fine with doing that. I don't feel like I need to deload necessarily, but I with just mainly my joint injuries and stuff, which are a few minor things, I think that it's generally a better approach for me to deload every 4th or 5th week. That's just been trial and error on my own part, and I think that I'll probably stick with something like that during the prep. As for how I usually structure them, I've taken a whole bunch of different approaches. I usually like to reduce both the intensity and volume. So usually, let's say if I'm doing 3, 4, or 5 sets of exercise, I usually just drop that down to about half. I usually do about 2 sets of exercise, and I'll usually drop the intensity to about 70%. I kind of like to do that, but I've done at higher percentages of intensity as well for deloading at times. And I just have a kind of personal preference around that 70% mark. Feels good to have a bit of a lighter week, really.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think I was just thinking of an analogy for kind of an advanced bodybuilder who has a few injuries. It's kind of like, I don't know, like a vintage Ferrari or something that's like super fast, super advanced, but is like old and a bit beat up. Like it probably has to get serviced a little bit more frequently. So you can kind of go very fast for a short period of time. Then you need to take it back so you can then repair and go again.
Yeah. And I mean, even if I could gain like maybe an extra kilo of muscle a year or something by beating myself up, it's not worth it to me if in 2 years I can't train legs anymore.
Yeah.
Because as I said, I do want to keep. If I stop competing at some stage, I still want to keep training because I love training. So longevity is definitely a big consideration for me at this point.
Mm-hmm. Actually, just this is kind of a side interest for me. I don't actually know your actual age. How old are you?
I'm 31.
31. Okay. Yeah. So you're not too old yet.
Too old, yeah. I've been training though since I'm 17. So close to, if my calculations are correct, close to 15 years in the gym. And of course, there's a lot of guys in their 40s and stuff like that, so that are still competing professionally. So I'm kind of like looking at the type of things that they say. They've got a lot of experienced guys like Jeff Albert and stuff like that, and it's the things that they're saying is, well, take that type of methodical, gradual approach as you kind of get older. It's not necessarily about hitting PRs all the time and that type of thing, because you want to stay healthy, and you're going to slow down in your rate of muscle gain anyway significantly.
Mm-hmm. I think actually talked about kind of rates of muscle gain, and so I guess that relates to your nutrition. And how's that looked over your off season? Kind of, have you tried to stick to a certain rate of gain per month or per week? And have you tried to kind of stick within a range of kind of so you don't get too far away from that stage weight? How have you approached that?
So I ended up, as you know, at my most depleted, around 88 kilos in the last prep. After that prep, I actually had a 2-week holiday because I was competing over in the US. So I ended up gaining, including water weight, about 10 kilos in that 2 or 3 weeks because I was just enjoying myself with food and so on, and I was absolutely fine with that. Mm-hmm. But from there, I kind of maintained for a little bit, and then gradually gained over a year up to about 105, 106 kilos, which is the heaviest I've been in off season, but not significantly different to where I was before 2014, which was around 104, 105 anyway. I think after that, what we did was we did a mini cut, or I don't know if it was really mini, it was really about 3 or 4 months of cutting, back down to about 98. And I think I kind of personally feel my best from an overall health perspective or whatnot at about that weight. I'm not puffing and puffing walking upstairs or up hills, and I'm able to. I also do, as you said earlier, I do karate, I do martial arts, so I feel kind of at my best weight for that, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. I'm able to move around a little bit more easily. And yeah, I just feel like I look a little bit better at this point at around that weight. So I actually, well, I did go on holidays as well. So I went on holidays for a month, actually lost a little bit of weight on holidays, as you do. Well, you can, I suppose, gain weight if you eat a lot, but
Yeah.
I was
Some people
walking
lose, some
around.
people gain.
Yeah, totally. So I was walking around a lot. So I lost actually a few kilos. Came back up to 98 over a few months, and I've just maintained that. So I haven't even been tracking macros honestly since Europe. I've just been eating a lot of the same types of foods. I throw a little bit of variation in there. I feel like it, but I generally just eat the same kinds of things a lot of the time. And so I've been very consistent with my weight. I've actually probably dropped a kilo over that time just through staying very active. I surf a little bit. I do karate. I walk around. I go on, not hikes, but I live near the coast, so I walk on the beach a fair bit. And so I think that's kind of where I've been at with what I've done. I've kind of had that gaining phase, did do a mini cut, and then I've just maintained. And I think that I haven't, looking at my off seasons, probably the one between 2000 and honestly the one between 2011 2014, I did gain a decent amount of muscle, a little bit, but I almost feel like, I don't want to say that I'm tapped out in terms of my ability to gain muscle mass, but I didn't really feel like I gained a huge amount going from 98 to 106. I feel like I almost look about the same going back down to 98. So I think it just makes sense to kind of, at this point, generally be at a bit of a closer starting point to my end goal for the contest prep, rather than getting up to 106 and then trying to go from 106 down to 88. Why not go from 98 down to 88 and really try to push the conditioning in the prep and kind of use that to my advantage?
Yeah, I think that's a wise approach. In that, I often think, why not stay a bit leaner? Because the leaner you are as well, the better chance you have of building muscle, because you're more insulin sensitive and all of those sort of P ratios and stuff like that. So why not stay a bit leaner? And you can, and hopefully if you are leaner, then you've got less time to prep, or you can give yourself loads of time anyway. But during that prep, like I think Jeff Alberts has talked about, you can take more time and hold on to more muscle and then get better conditioning. You actually look bigger because you've held on to more muscle. You've got better conditioning via a more sustainable approach. You haven't had to kind of strip away as much fat as maybe if you got really far away from stage weight.
Yeah, exactly. You can kind of really slow down that rate of fat loss so that you retain more muscle, and you can throw things in like diet breaks, or depending how you want to define it, like Mike said the other week, maintenance phases, where you may actually, even gain a little bit of muscle when you do prep. So yeah, I think that's a really good way to do it, particularly for advanced bodybuilders, not necessarily for somebody who's a little bit younger, or in terms of their own training age. Maybe they're going to actually see some benefit from being in a sustained surplus and really trying to bulk to within reason, but yeah, I think for more of the long-standing advanced competitor, there comes a point where you just see it in yourself. You're just not gaining huge slabs of muscle anymore. It's like, and you're always kind of coming in around the same stage weight. Maybe you can gain a small amount of muscle, you can just lose a little bit more fat, and it's just like a fine tweaking of it eventually.
Yeah, I can.
Unless you're.
And I think you also touched on a good point in that obviously there's going to be some individual difference there in terms of where do you feel good at. So you feel good at that lower body weight rather than that higher body weight anyway. And I know for myself personally, I've always just been kind of quite lean as even before I started training. So I end up staying quite lean. But yeah, actually we're kind of at a good point to move more onto this coming kind of contest prep season now. What are your kind of initial plans looking like? I guess you've had a consult with Alberto and he's got your training plan. Is he back? Are you back onto kind of the blocks and deloading every 4th week? Is that programmed in?
Yeah, so we've been discussing it at the moment, and we've been kind of back and forth about it. And yeah, one question was from Alberto was, do you want to actually manage your own training, or do
Cool.
you want me to manage your training? And I said to him, I've actually just been kind of modified. I've modified one of the old Mesa cycles that we ran that I liked, and that's not too far off what I've been doing. And so I've been doing that. I'm about 4 weeks into that, and I said, let me finish off this block, and we'll see how I'm feeling at the end of that, because I don't want to necessarily make a definite decision on doing all my own training just prior to prep when I'm still feeling great. And I said it's likely later on in the prep that I'll definitely need your guidance with that, because how you feel in the off season or at the start of prep is immensely different to how you feel at the end of prep. Where walking, for me, walking a block on the street at last time was difficult, let alone training in the gym. I was like on a machine. It's just like a chest press machine or something like that, and I'm like there for 5-6 minutes between sets, just struggling to put the plates on and off the machine. So at that point, I think I definitely need to step away from managing my own training and have him guide me in that regard. Yeah, but at the start, I'm going to kind of just cruise through a little bit while I can still tolerate doing decent volumes and stuff like that.
No, I think that's important. It is really hard to be both objective with your training and your nutrition towards the end of prep. Kind of that last 3 months, the dig into kind of the body fat levels that no one really wants to go to, but for the stage is the only reason you get there. I completely relate. Walking becomes effort, standing because like, everything's an effort, and so if you're programming for yourself, you might just do something you wouldn't want. Like you might probably be tempted to put too much, more than too little, because you'd be worried if you did less then you'd lose, whereas obviously someone can be objective and be like, right, we can actually go to like minimal volumes for a period of time or something along those lines. So I think that's a really kind of wise decision to be, well, it's a good way to go about things, and it's kind of a mature approach as well from someone who is obviously you're a coach yourself and you know your stuff, to actually to be able to say, oh, actually I need to take a sit back and like I'll just focus on my clients, you can take over. I think that's a really mature approach to have. In terms of nutrition, how's I'm guessing you haven't started the deficit yet. How's is it aggressive initially, or are you going for a bit of a soft approach?
I have to say I don't know at this point. I don't know. I can say that right now I just measured my calories. They're about 3650.
Cool.
And Alberto has all my other information, and he's said, okay, at this point I'm going to put a plan together. So I can't say for sure. I assume that we're not going to go super aggressive because I'm starting at a fairly lean body fat percentage. I just had a DEXA last week, and it's around 8.4% on DEXA. I don't know if that's necessarily accurate, but I'm definitely probably the leanest I've been at the starting point of prep for a long time. So with only probably about 10 kilos to lose over like 30 weeks, I assume that we're not going to necessarily be super aggressive, but I know that actually last time we kind of were, with the reasoning that at the beginning of the prep, I was starting at 105 kilos last time, so I had a little bit more body fat. And the reasoning there was, well, if you have a little bit more body fat, you're going to be able to tolerate faster rates of weight loss without necessarily losing as much muscle mass. But I don't know, because this time, as I said, I'm a little bit leaner. Will we necessarily take that approach? I would say probably we're going to start somewhere around 3,000 calories or something like that, considering that 3650 is around my maintenance, and probably just moderate levels of cardio and try to keep performance up in the gym is my best guess. But sometimes, when you work with a coach, they throw something different at you. So
yeah, I mean, I'd be, considering you are under 10, well, you probably are under 10%, even if the DEX is out a little bit, you're probably sitting under 10% or thereabouts. So probably shooting for that 0.5% body weight loss per week is probably a reasonable assumption to make.
You're going to say shooting for 0.5% body fat at the end of the
Yeah.
Yeah. Probably about half a kilo a week with the total rate of weight loss, I'd say. Yeah, but maybe even slower. I think probably have some diet breaks or a long diet break in there in the middle. Last time we did a 6-week diet break in the middle. So.
Cool. And with that diet break, actually, how did I guess was that maintenance calories, and then how did training look during that time?
Yeah, how did training look? I would say it didn't really change significantly. I can't remember change. We just kind of, did what we would normally do. I don't know if we changed mesocycles and stuff in the middle of it, but in terms of, I know that we actually kept cardio in, which is usually something that, a lot of people for a diet break, they'll take cardio out to, improve recovery. So we kept that in last time, and we basically just brought calories up to, I would say, around maintenance. And generally, I either maintained or lost a little bit of body fat. So that worked really well. I think that was really an approach that I enjoyed last time because of the longer prep time and stuff like that. It's hard to diet all the way through, and if you are doing a long prep and you don't have a huge amount of fat to lose, you probably don't need to diet all the way through anyway. But just having that psychological break really helped me, I think, and then made me feel like, okay, we've had a good 6 weeks break. I actually now want to diet and finish off this prep, Whereas if you're just doing, you're trying to just get through it, it's it can be draining.
Yeah, it becomes a massive grind. I remember my first competition season, I think it was like an 8-month diet, and there was only some refeeds, no even like week-long diet breaks, and it was like I was run into the ground. Definitely lost some muscle tissue towards the end as well. Whereas this time, starting in a much better place and planning like yourself, well, you probably will have those extended diet breaks. But something that I'm concerned about, I haven't done it before, and because you've experienced it, how did you kind of psychologically manage kind of being in prep mode and then being like, oh, now I'm in prep but eating and not looking to lose weight particularly? And how did you did that make you feel a bit funny at first? How did you kind of get around maybe some thoughts about, oh, I might put on body fat, or it might take me a step backwards, will I be ready in time? Did any of those thoughts come into your mind, or is that just me?
Yeah, I think that we do have those type of thoughts, particularly if you're, let's say you get to a certain weight and then your weight goes up by a kilo or two. You might think, well, I've gained body fat. But, I think that you have to look at the big picture and, do you actually look like you've gained fat? Or do you just look fuller? And it could just be glycogen retention that because you're eating more carbs. I think that if you allow enough time, and particularly if you've got a coach and you have to kind of trust them. But you can always, if you're worried about that type of thing, I would always ask those type of questions. What do you think? I gained a kilo this week, but do you think I actually look leaner? It's hard to sometimes make those decisions by yourself when it comes to yourself, because there's probably some type of emotional attachment to it all, and you can't necessarily always be objective with yourself. So when you have somebody else looking at your photos, and I kind of like I trust Alberto in my case, so I just kind of like I know that he's going to get me to the end result that I want. We've done it before, and I know that I have a good starting point last time. We have a lot of time to work with. We had a lot of time to work with last time. So, I don't think that I was ever too stressed about it. I just enjoyed it, to be honest. It's like deloading. I feel like a lot of people really stress out when it's like, I'm not getting a pump. It's like, well, that's not the point of the deload is not to get a pump. The point is to recover from training. So I kind of like just think, okay, what is the point of the phase that we're doing? Am I okay with this? It's part of the big picture. So.
Yeah, I guess more so for myself than you, because obviously you're much more competitive, but it is just bodybuilding at the end of the day. It's not kind of, you're not going to earn a shed load of money. You're not going to look awful on stage. And the stage is always there in later years. So it's not like it's a life break. Like, people get very emotionally attached to, like you said, deloads and like diet breaks. And in reality, it's just such a short, like, small thing as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the end of the world. And the thing is, as well, you go to some of these shows, you might be at your absolute best, and you could still get slammed for a number of reasons, whether it be just that there's actually better competitors there legitimately than you, and plus the fact that the judging is subjective, and so sometimes you may place better or worse than than you deserve to. So yeah, you kind of got to just do it, I think, partly for just enjoying the process. We're all competitive. Like, we don't want to just go, well, I'm just going to do this season because it's like 8 months of dieting. It's hard. I'm just going to do it for the purpose of getting up on stage. I think when you're competitive, you want to win, but you can't control it. So you've just got to do your best and hope that it comes out. Hope that it comes out the best for you. So.
No, definitely. I think focusing on the process, it's something everyone hears, and it's just something, I mean, some people really struggle to put into practice, but once it becomes habits, and I mean, you've been training for years upon years, so obviously it's something you just inherently enjoy. And I think, yeah, like you said, enjoying it, and then you can focus on the process. So that's a really, really important thing to take into account. And I just want to touch on, obviously you've competed several times now. What kind of are the biggest lessons you'll take away from other previous preps and bring into this one? Kind of, have you seen certain things happen, like sticking points, or like you particularly know you respond well to refeeds? Or actually, you could even touch on whether you do refeeds with Alberto or not.
Yeah. So for refeeds, I've done them both with Layne and with Alberto. And during contest prep with Layne, usually it was a twice a week refeed. With Alberto, it's usually a higher once a week refeed. I feel that they're a good strategy to have in there because I think so long as you can kind of control yourself, certainly deal with if there's any weight changes and that type of thing psychologically, and deal with any food cravings. I know that Mike the other week was talking about maybe don't do refeeds, just do straight dieting and embrace the darkness and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I think, that could be certainly a good strategy. If you can't control, like say, if you eat ice cream, if you want to eat the whole container and you can't control it. But if you can control yourself and you're okay with, on Sunday, I'm going to have, a few slices of pizza or whatever it is, and then go back to dieting the next day, and it doesn't phase you, then I think that it's good. Of course, you don't necessarily have to eat pizza on your refeed. You could eat.
No, you do.
Just eat rice like that. But I found that they've been effective, certainly in a psychological sense for me. It's just kind of like the diet break for a day. It's just giving you a little bit of a break from the dieting process temporarily. And I think that sometimes actually maybe it's due to like the increased NEAT, the increased energy that you get from them. Sometimes I actually drop a little bit after a refeed, so I don't know necessarily what that is, but it doesn't always happen. But sometimes, things that you do don't make sense. Same thing with diet breaks. Sometimes you do a diet break for a week or two and you end up leaner. You're eating more food. In terms of, so we were talking about refeeds. What was the if you could remind me of the rest of the question?
Yeah, I mean, actually, in relation to the refeed, I think quite often it can lead to that kind of, Lyle McDonald calls it that whoosh effect, where basically he talks about kind of females who get very stressed, they have high cortisol levels, they lead to water retention, and then they go out, he's like, go out, get laid and get stoned and like get drunk, and then the next day all the weight will come off because the fat cells, and also fat cells he talked about fat cells holding on to water before they release the fat with that water. So yeah, I think refeeds can be really helpful in that way as well. And then obviously, like you said, NEAT can go up, so you have to walk and get the pizza rather than. I was trying to think of a way your NEAT might come up, but definitely, I think all of those things can happen. And yeah, the second part of the question was basically lessons learned from past contest preps that you might take into this one. Anything that you've seen before that kind of you're like, I don't want to do that again. Yeah.
Okay. So I think the biggest thing that comes to mind is the first few times that I prepped, I really just didn't put enough emphasis on conditioning. And later on, in fact, the first time that I worked with Layne, I realized, okay, well, this is actually what is required to earn a pro card or to be on the pro stage and that type of thing, to do well, to get really conditioned. So that kind of was a bit of a wake up for me, because I came into bodybuilding and I didn't understand, just particularly from natural bodybuilding, how important conditioning was.
Yeah.
And so, that's definitely something that I highly prioritize these days, and a lot of people obviously do the same. So I think that was probably one of the biggest things that I learned early on. Also, I recall a show where I did do some of the no-nos for peak week, which was dehydration. And I actually, another thing, it might sound silly, but just allowing enough time to pump up before you get on stage.
Yeah.
Being really aware of the show schedule in the day, and asking the backstage helpers, hey, how much time do I have? Because I had just finished putting my tan on at this show, and the guy said, well, you're on stage in 5 minutes.
Wow.
And, I had no time to pump up. I did a couple of push-ups or something like that, and I looked really flat on stage. And some of those details, like, people don't really talk about that type of thing a lot, but you could do an 8-month prep, be in phenomenal condition, and if you don't get to pump up before you go on stage, and the other guys do, you're going to look really comparatively. So that type of thing. I think we did talk about weak points already a bit earlier on. I think the first thing that I noticed was that my legs were lacking when I started competing, and so when I started training them more frequently, they did come up. And so that's kind of always been on my mind after shows, what areas could I improve, looking at the photos, feedback from others. And interestingly, another thing, just now that I think of it with the refeeds, this was not doing it during a contest prep, but it's something that we did trial during the mini cut.
Yeah.
Was we did multi-day refeeds.
Okay.
And I'm not sure whether that's something that we'll implement in this prep or not. We did something like 7 days low and 3 days high. And just an interesting strategy. I think they're kind of just talking about testing it out with some of their athletes at that time. This was about a year ago.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that particularly if you have a long time for your prep, depending on how low the low days are and how high the high days are, it can be an interesting strategy to use if you want to really maintain a lot of muscle mass and kind of really slow the prep down. It will make fat loss a lot slower, particularly if you're doing something like 3 high days in a row.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought that was an interesting one to mention as well.
No, yeah, definitely. And I think the minor details actually were really interesting. So like not being able to pump up, that's an actual, like, it's a nightmare. That's like, I mean, it's similar to me when I see competitors on stage who are in fantastic condition. They're really muscular, but then they can't pose like for shit. They just cannot. They can't even do a front relax. They look ridiculous, and it's kind of frustrating.
Yeah, posing is another one. I went into my first couple of shows. I didn't know anything about posing, and my just like you said, the front relax, such a hard pose to hit for a novice person. How to actually make the lats flare out kind of takes a lot of work.
Yeah.
And I think that competitors, it's a good idea to allow a good couple of months beforehand to start practicing those poses. You don't want to leave it to the last minute like I did in a couple of my first shows. I'm doing this, and there's just no lats there at all.
Yeah, so I was the same. Well, for my first show, I wasn't I did a little bit of posing practice, but I left it way towards the end when you do have like no energy levels, so you just don't want to pose and you're cold all the time. So you're like, I don't want to be in my underwear. This isn't fun.
Yeah,
So it's not good.
yeah. You do like 2 minutes of posing. Yeah, that's enough.
And I think
I do
actually a key lesson from for me and for yourself, I guess, is having a coach to help you with these things. Like you've been through multiple competitions, you've made these mistakes. Now, when you have competitors, they don't make these mistakes. You rule those out. And same for myself. Like I've made I made the silly mistake of not shaving my armpits, which got me marked down for my first show. So
I think I may have done the same. I think I was like, I want to do bodybuilding, but I don't want to shave my legs. In fact, the first couple of shows, I actually wore speedos. I wore like
oh
swimmers,
no.
swimming, including to Worlds. I went to Worlds in 2010. I
Wow.
wore swimming. Yeah, because I was like, no, I'm not wearing too small.
That just kind of goes to show how far the sport's come as well, in terms of you'd never see someone in speedos now. That just wouldn't happen. So yeah, I'm super excited to see what conditioning you get into with Alberto, and kind of just following along your prep, because I know actually if we tell the listeners kind of where can they follow you, because I know you're on Instagram, see you on Facebook. You've also got your Muscle Academy website as well.
Yeah, so on Facebook, they could follow me at facebook.com/Muscle Academy. And on my website's www.muscleacademy.com.au. I have a blog on there, which I'll probably be reigniting soon and doing a lot of articles, and also, the process that I'm going through in contest prep, kind of keeping everybody up to date with that. Instagram is at @EvansSoon with 4 O's in the Soon part. Yeah, so feel free to follow me along there. I put a lot on Instagram. So.
Cool. Yeah, I'll make sure they're all below so people can kind of go and follow you and pester you, asking questions, and follow along on your journey, and that'll be really cool. So just want to say a massive thank you again, Evan, for coming on the show, and cheers everyone for listening.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on. Really appreciate it.